Welcome to Uncommon Sense, where we do our best to make it common again. I'm your host, Adrian Ahlquist, and today I'm joined with a very smart person. Literally. I'm joined by Henry Haverstock. Henry is the father of Father Paul Haverstock, who I want to have on this podcast, but he is the parish priest for the parish of our flagship Chesterton Academy. And he's also a very smart person, but we're first going to talk to the father of the father. Henry is a smart person because he is part of the group called Mensa, which, if you haven't heard of it, is, well, I'll let you explain. What is Mensa, Henry?
Sure. Thank you very much, Adrian. Mensa is an organization that was founded in the mid-1940s in England. The word Mensa means table, and it's a roundtable organization where all are welcome. The one criterion for membership is scoring in the top 2% on an intelligence test, so it's a little bit exclusive that way.
So basically you have to be in the 98th percentile of IQ, right?
Right.
Okay. Wow. So that's what I kind of wanted to talk about today was the intellect, which I understand is slightly different from IQ, but I want to talk about the intellect. I want to talk about it as it relates to Chesterton. Maybe, as we know, he's a great intellectual.
Yes.
And yeah, I want to explore the intellectual virtues and how it maybe relates to the spiritual virtues. Sure. So first off, yeah. When did you realize, and Henry's a very modest and humble person, but I'm going to put him in the spotlight a little bit. When did you realize that you may have been in the 98th percentile? Because at some point you got the urge to join Mensa, right?
Yeah, good question. Well, believe it or not, growing up, I was actually teased by a lot of my peers and called stupid. And at times I actually believed it.
Well, like Thomas Aquinas.
Maybe so, although I'm not in his class. But it spurred me when I was in high school to find out what my IQ was. I had no idea. And so I devised a ruse by which I could see my high school transcript, and I was hoping to see an IQ score on there. And in fact, I did. And that told me that indeed I actually was in the top 0.5%.
Wow.
So I realized that, all this name calling of me as stupid was not true. But then I had to be careful to not be too proud about that and to recognize, this is a gift God has given me and I need to use it for him and not for myself.
Wow, that's interesting. It is like St. Thomas Aquinas, even though no one I feel like is at his level. No. But he was accused of being a dumb ox. He was made fun of for that in school. Yeah. But in any case, so you discovered that, and what evidence was there? Like, what are some signs that you have this higher IQ?
Yeah, well, I was kind of, in some ways I was a typical young boy. In other ways, not so typical. I started wiring low voltage direct current circuits at the age of 3.5 independently. And I started playing chess at 5 and bridge and scrabble probably at about 8. And I got into stamps and I made saltwater batteries, and I just had a lot of hobbies that probably a lot of my peers didn't have. And I loved numbers. I absolutely adore numbers, as I know you do.
Yes.
And I started playing with them and doing mental gymnastics. And I realized, not everyone, when I was in my late teens, just for fun, I sat down in a quiet room and memorized 12-digit number, and kind of a hard one, and then I squared it in my head just for fun. And most people don't consider that fun, probably, but it was for me, it was really fun. And I think but I think I realized that I was a little bit different than my peers. And so for me, I actually joined Mensa initially at the age of 18 in 1972 because I really wanted to be with people who I felt would accept me as being a little different. And it would be okay to be different because sometimes in society, it's not always okay to be different.
Right. I wanted to ask a slightly devil's advocate question. Yeah. Isn't Mensa sort of elitist? Because you're going into this group and you're saying, "Oh, I'm smarter than everyone else." I have a response to that, but I want to hear yours. Sure. How do you respond to that?
Sure, very good question. I think maybe why a person wants to go into it is important in answering that question. I think for me initially, again, the reason was I was seeking camaraderie with people who were kind of different like I was.
Right.
And then later, when I rejoined it in about 1994, one of my motives was to actually evangelize, because I think that the two hardest groups of people to reach with the gospel are intellectuals and wealthy individuals. And I found in Mensa that there were so many people who were either atheists or agnostics, so it was a wonderful mission field for me.
They might have been both an intellectual and a rich person, because we know that there's a correlation, at least in our culture, that the IQ is correlated with success. So
well, actually, though, interestingly, I think many of the people I got to know in Mensa were actually not that wealthy.
Oh, interesting.
One of them was a house painter. I've met some fascinating people with amazing abilities who have rather mundane occupations.
Interesting. Well, it's not a very strong correlation. It's strong for psychology, but it's like 0.3. You know, it's for the R squared value.
Sure.
No, but that's very interesting. Why do you think that is actually? Why do you get these people? I mean, it's kind of the Good Will Hunting. If you've seen that movie,
I haven't.
Okay. Well, this janitor turns out to be a genius, and he's kind of pushed into this world of academia, and but so why do you suppose you find this effect?
You know, I think intellectuals are interesting. I mean, I think many of them do like to pursue occupations that lead to great financial success, but I think some don't. Some just like to use their minds in interesting ways. I was a tournament Scrabble player for a year and a half. And one of the best players in our club was a bricklayer. And he was amazing. Brilliant Scrabble player. And I'm pretty sure pretty sharp guy, too.
Yeah.
But he, for him, he didn't, aspire to an academic profession, but instead he used, I think, Scrabble as an outlet, as a channel for his intellect, and did it very well.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. That you actually touched upon something I wanted to address.
Yeah.
The idea that it's really hard for intellectuals sometimes to gain wisdom, spiritual wisdom, right?
Yes.
Why do you think that is? Because you'd think, well, here's what Socrates said. I recently reheard this quote: "To know the good is to do the good."
Yeah.
I don't know if we would agree with that. I'm kind of curious to hear what you would say. I don't know if I agree with that.
I can't agree with it.
Okay.
I can't agree with that. I thought about it.
Okay.
And it's pretty obvious. It flies in the face of Scripture, frankly. I mean, if we look at what St. Paul wrote in Romans chapter 7, he said, "The evil that I don't want to do, I do, and the good that I want to do, I don't do. O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death?"
And the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Right.
Yeah.
So even when we know what is good and right, because of our sinful nature, we still struggle and we fight against it. We have this war going on within us constantly, the Spirit of Christ fighting against the spirit of the flesh.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Socrates was pretty good, but he wasn't perfect, right?
Right. And that's why Plato wasn't perfect.
No.
For those Platonians out there. Right. Or Platonists, rather. Sorry.
And I actually read, in preparation for our meeting today, I actually read a number of quotes by Socrates, over 100.
Really?
Yes. And some of them seem to be a bit self-aggrandizing. I mean, they really do. I mean, he says, I know so little that I know I'm brilliant, basically. And it's like, well, now, isn't that kind of a backhanded compliment, self-compliment,
Yeah, it's true, but it's funny. I imagine someone like him, it was really hard to be humble. I mean, it's so hard for someone like the smartest person alive, and maybe the most wise, to be humble, right?
Right.
Yeah. They always say, don't be the smartest person in the room. That's one of the reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think so for a lot of smart people, they have to also be good at learning, right?
Yes.
It's because you can be smart but then close off your mind.
Yes.
But it is kind of that idea of, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. You want someone else to be smarter so you can learn from them, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like if you want to get better at something, you seek out somebody who's better than you are. When I wanted to get good at Scrabble so I could play competitively, I played against the best players I could find. Before I played tournament ping pong on the college campuses, I sought out the very best players because they're the ones who will make you better, the ones you lose to.
Interesting.
So I did that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have another question. Why do you think that there is this connection between people who are very smart, people with a very high IQ, and not having a certain emotional intelligence? They seem to not jive with I don't want to say normal people, but people of maybe a more average IQ.
Yeah.
Why is that, do you think?
I think many of us, and I include myself, because at the ripe young age of 61 and a half, I was diagnosed with mild Asperger's. I think many intellectuals have Asperger's.
So why is that? Yeah.
I think it's a wiring thing. I really do. I think we're wired a little differently. And in some ways, it's a wonderful thing. And in other ways, it's a challenge. I mean, in my case, there are times when I have xenophobia and I need to get away from people. And there are other times when people energize me greatly. And I think that's true for a lot of intellectuals, that, we struggle with social things because we're wired differently. We really are.
Interesting.
I think it's hard wiring. I think it's mostly, innate. I don't think it's something that's learned as much.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. All right. So I wanted to ask about Chesterton now. So like we said, Chesterton was an intellectual.
Yes.
Where would you say his IQ is? Actually, before that, let's talk about, for people who aren't familiar with the IQ scale, can you give some background on it?
Yeah.
And before we ask what Chesterton's is.
Sure. So first of all, there are actually a number of different IQ scales. There's not just one. One of the more common ones is the Stanford-Binet, but there's also the Cattell, there's the Wechsler-Bellevue, there are probably at least a half a dozen that are deemed reasonably accurate. And the scales actually vary. For example, a 148, I believe, on the Cattell is equivalent to a 132 on the Stanford-Binet, which is the cutoff for Mensa.
Oh, okay.
So I would, if I were to rate, or if I were to guess what Chesterton's IQ might be, I would do it in terms of probably the Stanford-Binet, or something which is actually quite similar to the OLSAT. I don't know if you took the OLSAT when you were in high school. Okay. You would see your score on your high school transcript, just like my son and daughter
Yeah.
have.
Is that the most common one, do you think?
I think it's the most common one used now in high schools, certainly.
Gotcha.
I took what was called the OLMAT back in 1970 or 69, 68. It's been renamed for political correctness.
Gotcha.
So the OLMAT stands for Otis Lennon Mental Abilities Test, and heaven forbid that we should say anyone has mental abilities. So now it's been changed to the OLSAT, Otis Lennon School Aptitude Test.
All right.
So there you have it. So, IQ is an interesting thing. I think it's definitely significant in understanding a person, but it doesn't define them.
Right.
I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's really hard to even conceptualize what the IQ is measuring. Like, it is clearly measuring something, but it's not just your intelligence in general. IQ does not equal intelligence. I think that there's actually consensus on that, because intelligence is this abstract concept that we can't nail down perfectly, right? Yeah. But so for an IQ, is it for this type of IQ, it's right that 100 is exactly the median and the average?
100 is the average. The range they consider for average is about 90 to 109 is technically kind of that I think that maybe I want to say the first standard deviation, something like
it's
that.
It's not 15, because one of them that I looked at was the standard deviation was 15.
Oh, do you know which one that was?
No, it was in our statistics book.
Oh, okay.
Because that's a big statistic.
Okay.
But
I
anyway,
wonder if that was the Cattell maybe. But anyway, so roughly. And so, the majority of people would fall in the range of, again, depending on the test, 85 to 115 or, high 80s to low 1-teens.
Okay.
And then when you start talking about 120 and above, you're talking about someone who is probably headed to college and who has superior intelligence. And then when you hit the 132, that's where you qualify for Mensa. And then if you have over a 138, you qualify for Intertel.
Okay.
which is more difficult. And if you have a 170, you qualify for ISPE, which I do not have. So
Wow.
that's
Wow.
top 1/10%.
Oh wow. Okay. So didn't Einstein, wasn't he like 160 around?
It's interesting. Time Life did a study on the mind back in the 1960s, and they actually ascribed IQs to many of the famous people that we are aware of. People like
So we
Lincoln.
don't know for sure because he didn't take the test.
No.
Yeah.
No.
We're just guessing.
Yeah, with Einstein, they ascribed an IQ of 170 to him. I think that was the same IQ they ascribed to Mozart. They gave Lincoln an IQ of 156, Napoleon an IQ of 144. You know who had the highest IQ?
Who?
Goethe, the German poet.
Oh wow.
210, which is off the charts.
The author of Faust, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
My goodness.
10. So, and there were a couple. I think Immanuel Kant was either 170 or 180. So they had.
But that must be difficult because how are they determining that Goethe has a higher IQ, much higher IQ than someone like Einstein?
Right. Very difficult to say, because even if you look at someone like Richard Feynman, who actually worked with Einstein on the atomic bomb during the Second World War, Feynman was a brilliant physicist.
Yeah.
And yet his IQ was, I believe it or not, in the 120s. And yet he won a Nobel Prize for electrodynamic quantum mechanics in 1965. And he taught at Caltech, one of the toughest schools in the country to get into. So it's an elusive thing in some ways. It's a little hard to wrap your hand around it, so to speak, as you said.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
If Einstein was around 170, people kind of look at him as the brilliant one, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, there are a few people that are much smarter. And that's interesting that Mozart's at 170. That surprises me because he seemed to have, at least when it comes to music, a photographic memory. And
he was phenomenal. I mean, he was composing good stuff at age 5, I believe.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Would you say that most people at that IQ level probably have a photographic memory into some capacity? Because it's not like you have it or you don't, right?
It's memory is. I wouldn't say that memory and IQ are directly correlated necessarily. Most IQ tests really are more about thinking in certain ways than they are. Than they are about memorizing.
Okay.
Your dad has an amazing memory, and he has a very high IQ, I'm sure, as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So now back to the initial question.
Yes.
What do you think Chesterton had? Where would you put him estimated?
At least 170.
At least 170. Wow. Okay. Well, you heard it here first, guys. So you would say his IQ was around Einstein's.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I would say so. Very different wiring from Einstein's.
Yeah.
Although Einstein didn't do very well in math as a kid.
Interesting.
He really didn't. I think he failed like 5th grade math.
So that's where that rumor was that he wasn't good at math. I mean, to a certain extent, that was kind of true.
Yeah, he struggled at times, but obviously brilliant guy. Brilliant.
Yeah. So Chesterton's at 170-ish. Yeah. I mean, we see evidence of that for sure. I mean, he couldn't have written as much as he did at such a quality, right? He had the quality and the quantity.
Yes.
And he, as my dad has said, he would write a work while dictating it, another work, a completely different work, to his secretary. Yeah. I think he can write with both hands and two different things. Wow. Yeah. So that checks out, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So we briefly touched on it, but you have the intellectual virtues, then you have the spiritual virtues, right?
Right.
And sometimes there might be a relationship, like you said, actually, that it seems like the smarter you are, the harder it is to be spiritually virtuous. It's not necessary. Like, you can still be a good person and be smart.
Oh yeah.
Chesterton was an example of that.
St. Thomas Aquinas.
St. Thomas Aquinas. It's a perfect example of that. Yeah. So how would you relate the two? Why do you think it has that relationship, that it gets harder? And if that's the case, if you're a smart person, what reason do you have not to be angry about it, or to kind of be like, oh, this is a crutch, Yeah.
This
might be a hard question, but yeah.
No, it's a good question. I mean, I would just say it all relates to a 5-letter word that we all know, and that's pride. I think intellectuals struggle probably as much with pride as any group of people other than maybe wealthy individuals. I really do. I think, people who are bright think they're sometimes better than others. They think they can control things. They think they can do things better than other people can. And sometimes they can, but they don't give God the glory. Instead, they give themselves the glory. And I think that's why many of them turn away from God and become atheists, because they feel they're smart enough to maybe be their own God.
Yeah.
And so that's the approach they take. And it precludes practicing the spiritual virtues.
So it's not because of the intelligence. There's a lurking variable that is pride.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
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 But could you say, this might be controversial, but if you can embrace the humility and explore the intelligence, explore higher ideas, don't you have a chance of kind of attaining a really spiritual elevation, I guess, an elevated spiritual state, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. You do. I think there's always going to be the dichotomy between the two, though, the tension.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I mean, I think you can...
And ultimately, it's because of God's grace. It's not because of you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's everything we do, as we know that is good, is from God. Everything. We can do no good in and of ourselves. And so whether it's our intellect or physical prowess, whatever it is, it's all about Him. And I think Chesterton clearly saw that and lived that. I mean, it's to see a man of his brilliance, who was so humble and could laugh at himself, and often did, and wrote amazingly. I mean, Orthodoxy and Everlasting Man, those are books that I have read and that are just, they're exciting. They're deep. And I share them with others. I would love to have known him. I would love to have been a friend of his, and to have collaborated with him maybe on something even. That would have been exciting,
We at the Society would agree with that.
Yes.
Especially my dad.
Yes.
Yeah. But hopefully we will get to do that in heaven, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, this is great. I mean, thank you so much for coming and giving that wisdom. With intelligence and wisdom are not always together, but in this case they are.
Oh, well, thank you. You're very kind, Adrian.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone, I didn't say this at the beginning, I probably should have, but please consider becoming a knight of the Society of G.K. Chesterton. It's an elite giving group, and we're going to be having a dinner for the knights coming up soon on October 16th, I believe. And it's going to be actually at the Chesterton Academy of the Twin Cities, our flagship school. And it's going to be really fun. That's a quarterly event, by the way. If you're a knight, that's one of the benefits. But being a knight really, really helps us with our mission. I've said this before, our mission to evangelize through education. Hopefully this was educational for people. I think it was. But yeah, please consider that. Go to chesterton.org/knights. And thank you so much, Henry.
Of course, Adrian. My pleasure and my privilege.
Absolutely. And thank you all for listening. Until next time, help us to make uncommon sense more common.